Okay, so today we're going to be applying the feminist theory to The Glass Castle, the novel and memoir by Jeanette Walls. It was an excellent book. I would highly recommend reading it. And let's just have a quick overview of what happened for those who haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. So the book follows the life journey of Jeanette Walls, a young girl who began her roots moving from town to town with her peculiar family. Money was so scarce as she grew up, and her father was known as a town drunk wherever they went. She and her family landed her father's old hometown of Welch, West Virginia, before she sets her heart on moving away to New York City with her sister, where she wants to work as a newspaper journalist. And her parents actually follow her to New York, and they spend many years living as homeless people. And later on in her life, her father passes away, and she settles down the countryside, married to her second husband, a writer. And the story just follows her everyday struggles with her three other siblings that they grow up with very little food, very little money, and a set of very strange, untraditional parents that didn't really fit in anywhere, actually. Okay, jumping right in, we're gonna go and start with Jeanette's attitudes toward the main people in her life, male and female. Well, her mother, for starters, was everything but a good mother to her four children. She didn't cook, she painted all day, left her children to fend for themselves. Jeanette could not help have a dislike towards her mother's childlike attitude. For instance, when they lived in Battle Mountain, Nevada, Rose Walls was hired as a teacher for a school, but Rose, being a grown woman, it was up to her kids to get her mother out of bed and make sure she was dressed and at school on time. She showed an obvious disregard for her children and spent most of the time concerned about her own wishes, such as painting and her art career, which never took off. It was because of Rose's lack of ability to care for her children, Jeanette had to take out a mother role in high school years, and even before that at age of 12 and 11. And just to save money to feed the family and pay expenses, and the disapproval of her mother's behavior is clear to read sometimes, and she says things like, "It was hard for me to believe that this woman with her head under the blankets feeling sorry herself and boohoo like a 5-year-old was my mother." But, well, reading this story, it was difficult for me not to feel the same hate towards Rose. She hid her $1 million wealth from her starving family until later on when they were like 30 years later. She still didn't tell them about it and refused to sell the land because it was sentimental while she was living as homeless people. Her disregard for her family made me respond in dislike to her behavior. I also disliked her because she never controlled her husband. He would waste the little money they had and drank constantly. Her father, on the other hand, the relationship between Jeanette and father was pretty strong compared to her siblings. Despite Rex's drinking and money wasting, it was Jeanette who always supported him and tried to see the best in him. For example, when they were living in Welch, money was very tight and there was no extra money to spend. But when the father asked for money for beer and cigarettes, she gave him the money despite knowing that she shouldn't. He simply waited for me to fork over the cash, as if I knew I wouldn't say no. And I didn't. Giving him the money pissed me off. I was mad at myself, but even madder at Dad. He knew I had a soft spot for him the way no one else in the family did, and he was taking advantage of it. Her response to her father showed her strong loyalty. Her soft spot for her father is what made me like Jeanette as a person. She was compassionate and understanding. Despite all of his issues, Jeanette found himself wanting to support her father and somehow saw the best in him when no one else really did. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about how most of the women in the text are represented. That's a picture of Jeanette and Lori when they're much older in life and finally settled down. And the women in the book are represented in different ways. There are females such as Jeanette's sister Lori, as seen in the picture, and Rose's mother, her grandmother, who was a great role but died when she was very young. And they were represented very well in the story. But the two main adult females in Jeanette's life are not represented very well, and they were poor role models in Jeanette's life. The two females were her mother, obviously Rose, and her grandmother, Rex's mother, Irma. Irma was represented as a classic hateful mother-in-law to Rose and was awfully rude to Jeanette and her siblings. Even before meeting her, all references to Irma were negative, and Rex showed a strong reluctance to see his own mother. Irma was nothing but rude and abusive to her grandchildren and displayed awful behavior. Jeanette said if she didn't look like the look on our faces, she would hit us on the head with a serving spoon. Walls 146. Irma was nothing like a typical grandmother. She was constantly angry, constantly rude, and constantly abusive. She was also very unlike a typical wife in the 70s. She was loud, whiskey drinking, rude old lady. Her husband was also not a typical husband. He was a very quiet and reserved and rarely spoke back to his wife. Irma was in control of the household and everyone in the household. She was represented by a very strong personality and an awful one at that. As mentioned before, Rosemary, Jeanette's mother, was represented as a clueless, selfish, and unfocused mother. She didn't cook for her family, spent so much time painting, and placed her own wants above anything else. She was very unlike a typical housewife, as she didn't clean, cook, or care for anyone but herself. She represented the pool of unfocused and strange mothers who thought mostly about herself. Her representation was very poor, and she lacked likable qualities and paid no attention to her four children. Okay, moving on to the roles of men and women in the text. Well, beginning with the children, the roles of Jeanette and her brother and sister Lori and Brian sometimes had to be breadwinners and the money makers, actually, and cooks and general caretakers for the whole family and themselves. They had a younger sister, Maureen, but she was way too young compared to her siblings to do much help. But Jeanette quickly took on a leadership role for her siblings despite being younger than Lori. Lori was more school-based and studying-based but Jeanette felt a want to help her siblings, took it upon herself to care for them, and on several occasions she would buy food and make meals for Brian and Maureen whilst 208, and even took it upon herself to budget the money and make ends meet. She took the roles of her mother and father, who showed little ability to care for children. While her father, Rex, within Jeanette's family, Rex is the father and should have been the breadwinner, but because of his drinking and inability to hold a job, he's not much support to his family other than odd job money and his constant moving from his family from place to place because of it was usually people coming for them for taking money because they always owed people money, so they constantly move and yeah. Her mother, Mary, on the other hand, did have a degree and did have education, and sometimes played a breadwinner role by getting teaching jobs and regular salary at odd times. But even with her skills to work, it was hard to call her a breadwinner for the family because she rarely wants to work and spent the little money they had on random, unnecessary items such as crystal cut vases, painting supplies, books that filled up their small house, and just in general, really didn't know how to take care of a family at all. So her role was really like a clueless teenager more than a mother. Okay, well, social condition for women in the 60s. Um, the book mainly took place in the 60s and 70s, and Jeanette was born on April 21st, 1906 to be exact. And yeah, the woman in the 60s. The 60s were a start to a new era. Women were branching out of their housewife lives, and many women were beginning to understand they were equal to men. The opportunity to be equal to men in society was a new topic, and it was completely changing a nation. The goals of feminism, equal pay, equal opportunity, freedom from sexual harassment, shared responsibility for housework and childbearing would inspire women for decades. I mentioned the 60s because this is when Jeanette's mother Rose was starting to become a mother. She showed no likeness of a typical mother from the 50s or even the 60s. She didn't do homework, she didn't do housework, painted, didn't cook, and worked more than her husband. She was a woman who was completely embracing the feminist era in her own way, which was coming in. She'd rather be homeless and on an adventure than be in a home baking meals for her children. Woman's mom's eyes were bright. I'm such an excitement addict. And yeah, Rose was unlike any mother or female during the 50s era. The 60s, women were gaining a lot more rights, voting rights, the world wars had ended. They were really embracing that their lives could be different now, and they were embracing the fact that they didn't just have to be men's little sidekick, have children, stay at home. And I think Rose was really embracing the idea. Even her mother really wanted her to be a stay at home, stay around Arizona where they lived, and just do as she said. But Rose wasn't like that. She ran off with Rex They had a family. She still would not stay as a housewife. She wanted to move around. She wanted to do things, which is very unlike the women from previous eras, which, yeah. Okay, now finally we're going to talk about the limitations of women. And there wasn't very many limitations in the story because it was literally the start of the feminist era in the 60s. And women's lives were way less restricted than previous decades. Rose pretty much did whatever she pleased, and her husband didn't say anything or was too drunk to notice. Rose worked while her husband stayed at home most of the time, and she would plan trips across the country with the children and almost left without her husband. Rose was not restricted very much in her motherly years, and that was what gave her children to choose their own destiny and escape from the unreliable family. Laurie and Jeanette really didn't have restrictions either. They left at home at a young age. They showed no signs of being afraid or letting themselves be restricted back into their family or their difficult money and societal situation. So there really wasn't much of restrictions for these women. They pretty much embraced their ability to do things, and men really didn't say much, or if they did, we really didn't hear about it in the book. And that showed that really the feminist era was really taking a strong hold during this time period, which is nice actually, which is good for them. And that was Applying Feminist Theory to the Glass Castle. Overall, great book. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.